Firecracker Plant, Russelia equisetiformis. Let's propagate Firecracker Plant aka Russelia equisetiformis. I start propagate my Russelia plant by cutting their stem above 3 inches from the ground. And about 0.5 inch below the leaf node. Then I make Russelia cutting about 25 centimeters in length. And plant my Russelia cutting 10 centimeters deep in container. Also, before planting my Russelia cutting, I make sure that my soil I using in moist condition. My soil pH about 7 pH when trying to propagate Russelia. This is because moist soil is much easier to work with than dry soil. Also, after planting, I give a very light sprinkle of water. Another method to rooting Russelia cuttings are by using water. On average, Russelia cuttings propagate using water take 3 to 4 weeks to produce root. When propagate Russelia cuttings using water, I change the water daily. I change the water daily because to minimize the risk for potential fungal infections. For me, my preference to propagate Russelia cuttings are by using soil. You can choose whatever method to suit your needs when trying to propagate Russelia cuttings. This is what Russelia flower bud look like. Believe it or not, the roots that a plant produces in water propagation are different from the roots it produces in the soil. Roots that produce by soil propagation are thicker and sturdier. These roots are better for finding and taking in water from the environment. My soil temperature taken at 9 in the morning. For me, when I try to propagate Russelia cuttings using water, they often make smaller and more fragile roots. So I got to take this into account when moving a water-propagated plant into soil, or it may not survive the move. Soil I use to propagate Russelia cutting contain cocoa peat, red burn soil, micro, fine sand, old humus, and charcoal. Russelia thrive in almost any type of soil. It's tolerant from loamy, clay, sandy, or chalk soil textures. Also, please make sure that your growing media are sterilized and clean. By choosing sterilized and clean growing media will prevent new cutting from becoming infected from disease-causing pathogens. You can use whatever growing media available to your convenience for propagate Russelia cutting. As long as you use well-drained soil to propagate Russelia cutting, you will be fine. Soil pH for growing Russelia 6 to 7.5 pH. For Russelia plant once established, the root ball and root system does not like to be disturbed. Before I make a cutting for propagation Russelia cutting, I sanitized my scissor. I sterilized my scissor using rubbing alcohol swab. My rubbing alcohol swab contains 70% isopropyl alcohol. According to the Center for Disease Control, isopropyl alcohol in concentrations of 70% or more will disinfect surfaces for bacteria, fungi, and viruses. I repeat this process before I make a new cutting from new plant. When using rubbing alcohol, please do not dilute it with water. Because dilute isopropyl alcohol will make the concentrations go down. This will resulting low at effectiveness against bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Alcohol is highly flammable, so take precautions. Please safely dispose of alcohol swab after using it. You also can use chlorine, bleach to disinfect your tools. For using bleach, we can make 10% solution. Which means 1 part bleach and 9 part water. I don't recommend using bleach for pruning and cutting tools that require a sharp edge. Since bleach is known to be corrosive to metals. Please safely dispose of bleach after using it. Please don't pour bleach in your garden as it can harm plants and beneficial soil organisms. If desired, you can use rooting hormones for the Russelia cutting. I didn't use any rooting hormones in this video. The main reason to use rooting hormones is to aid in rooting difficult to root plant species. Other benefit to use rooting hormones are reduce shrink and rooting time, increase the number of roots produced, accelerate root initiation, and improve rooting uniformity. But using rooting hormones' effectiveness depend on the plant species. For example, you gain high benefit when using rooting hormones for bougainvillea cutting compared to coleus cutting. Usually rooting hormones come with liquid or powder or spray form. Rooting hormones come in various formulations and contain different ingredients. So choose carefully what kind of rooting hormones you want to use. Please read and follow the instructions carefully before starting using any rooting hormones. It is also common to have some cuttings fail to produce root. But for me, Russelia cutting have higher rate to produce root compared to rose. For successful Russelia cutting propagation, it is important to check that the growing medium is still moist conditioned daily. During unrooted cutting stages, Russelia cutting require water to prevent desiccation. Water is important since it needed for processes such as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis influence root development and growth. As we all know, plants cannot grow or survive without photosynthesis. We need to keep Russelia plants well watered until they are well established. Once mature, Russelia plants is drought tolerant. In first 30 days, my water usage are about 100 milliliters every time I water my plant. I only water Russelia cutting if the top soil become a little bit dry. In first 30 days, I place my Russelia cutting at bright indirect light condition. My soil temperature 28.3 degrees Celsius in early morning. For Russelia cutting, you also need to look out for any signs of rotting, other than shed leaves or damaged cuttings. When my Russelia plant establish, I allow the soil to dry out between waterings my plant. At this stage, I water my Russelia about 300 milliliters every time I water my plant. Water usage depends on container size, container type, weather, and climate you live in. Your water usage may be different than me and depend on your climate. You may water twice per day. Container size I use for growing Russelia, height 23 centimeters, width 23 centimeters. You also can grow Russelia in bigger container than mine. The bigger the container, the bigger root system will develop and will resulting bigger plant. Please make sure your container have good drainage, and waterlogged container will promote root rot. For me, the advantage for growing in container is gives me more control over sunlight, moisture, and temperature. Russelia need at least 6 to 8 hours of full sun to thrive, and Russelia prefer to grow in full sun location. I use fertilizer on my Russelia every 4 weeks. I use all-purpose liquid fertilizer for growing my Russelia. You can use whatever fertilizer available to your convenience. Please read and follow the instructions carefully before starting using any fertilizers. My minimum temperature when growing Russelia is 23 degrees Celsius, and my maximum temperature when growing Russelia is 33 degrees Celsius. Russelia native distribution are from Mexico. Russelia flowers are slender, bright red, tubular flowers measuring about 2.5 centimeters long, borne on the tip of branches resembling firecrackers, usually in 1 to 3 flowered clusters. Russelia leaves are reduced to small scale-like leaflets, bright green, ovate to elliptic, measuring about 8.5 to 15 millimeters long by 6 to 9 millimeters wide. Russelia nectar are popular food among hummingbirds and butterflies. Genus Russelia is named after Dr. Alexander Russell, a Scottish naturalist and author of Natural History of Aleppo Russellianus. Species equisetiformis refers to the plant having a horsetail-like habit. Thank you for watching. Huzzah!